Next up is David Hone from the University of London, United Kingdom, and Darren Tanke, RTMP, on the scientific communication of fossil preparation in the digital realm.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you to Mark for waking everyone up on a Sunday morning. My title today is long and kind of highfalutin, but really this is just about communicating through the internet and talking about research and scientific communication, and in particular fossil preparation, and a series of blog posts and associated little pieces that Darren and I put together. I think it finished about a year ago now, but it ran for about 8 or 9 months in the end. And this is kind of just a description of the sort of things that we did, how we think outreach can work and why it's important, and in particular in the context of fossil preparation. So scientific outreach, it goes by a lot of different names and kind of interchangeable terms, and lots of people use different things like communications, outreach, engagement, public engagement, widening participation, and so on and so forth. But I think ultimately all of these are more or less synonymous, and effectively what it comes down to is providing some kind of link or bridge between us as the scientific community and the general public, both in terms of direct communication by ourselves with things like the internet or things like public talks, but also including via the media. And this, I think, is kind of in addition to the fundamental things that go on with things like having the Tyrrell Museum. That is a museum that people will actively come to, and there are, of course, members of the public who will seek out and read purely scientific papers. But this is kind of more about, reaching out beyond that, beyond these basics which are always going to happen, and trying to engage further with other people. And we do need to bridge that gap. There is this ivory tower effect, which is often mentioned, the way that academics can be seen to be, even when they're not, take a kind of imperious position above the screaming hordes and masses below us. I have really heard academics use almost those terms for describing the public. I think it's horrific. But that does mean, therefore, that concept does persist. And we need to try and break down those barriers and communicate with these people and show that we are part of a wider thing and try and bring our scientific knowledge and expertise and the research that we're doing to the wider public. And it is kind of difficult because, even relatively simple levels of research are, of course, going to be complex and challenging even for students in our fields. And, of course, for a larger number of the public, they do not have PhDs or even degrees in biology or geology and related fields. And I think this is especially important when it comes to paleontology because there is such a huge interest in what we do. Paleo papers and paleo research and dinosaurs and macrofauna are so interesting for the general public. And yet it's something which is very rarely taught in schools and often even gets very limited coverage in even biology degrees and geology degrees. And therefore we have a particularly wide gap between our research and what the general public already knows, and that's what we're trying to bridge. So why should we do outreach? Again, I have come across the attitude far more often than I wish was ever true of researchers who think that this is a waste of time. Why are you communicating to the public? You should be writing papers, you should be getting grant money, you should be doing field work. Don't bother dealing with these guys. I think that's a terrible attitude, but even if that is your attitude, I hope that I can cynically show for the cynic that there are very good reasons to do this. First of all, media attention and outreach efforts has been shown to increase the citations of papers. So the fact that you are going out and presenting your work or pushing your message out further means that more people are reading your science and more people are going to be citing your research or following through with your methods. And of course, that's something we all want to happen. So it is well worth doing from the purely cynical perspective. Secondly, however, in the UK at least, now every grant application through the national research councils requires that researchers include an outreach part of their project. So in addition to actually getting the funds to do their research, they have to dedicate some of their time and some of their money to doing some kind of communication project with the public. So you're going to have to do this now, whether you like it or not. Thirdly, I think it helps develop skills with wider applications. Certainly I feel my writing has come on with all the blog work that I've done over the years. Hopefully, though you can be the judge, my public presentation skills have improved because I've been doing lots of it, but I genuinely think it does make a difference. And finally, and I honestly think most critically, I feel we as scientists and researchers and those within academia have a moral obligation to try and communicate our research to the public when it is publicly funded. In the same way that if the public paying their taxes, new roads are being built, they get to drive on them. New police and fire guys are out there, they're protecting them. They have paid for this research and we should tell them what we have done with their money and let them access it. I also think that's actually true regardless of whether or not the public have funded it. But I do think we can make a very strong case and a moral case that we should be communicating what they have paid for. Now, in terms of presenting preparation, this is something I'd long wanted to do on my blog, but I'm not a preparator. I have done little bits and bobs, and of course I communicate readily with preparators about things that are being done, but I knew it wasn't really for me. And I didn't think I could do it justice. And teaming up with Darren Tanke, and obviously where this talk comes in, so something I'd wanted to cover, and the idea came up that we could produce a series of posts online through my blogs describing the process and pattern and try and bring this out to a wider audience. Now, I think this is important because preparation is one of those things that I think often gets overlooked by the public. We don't really see it properly. If you look through your dinosaur books and the paleo books and documentaries on TV, they love showing guys wandering out in the field with their hats and hammers and little water bottles looking for stuff. And they love showing guys getting the diggers out and making a huge hole in the ground and then airlifting the jacket out. And then there's one photo of a guy with a pin vise leaning over a single vertebra, and then they show a mounted T-Rex. And we all know just what went on in that one step, and it really doesn't show it. And even if they do, they are talking about just the kind of preparation, or they'll talk about getting the material out of the matrix, and they won't talk about stabilizing and repairing brakes and making casts and building mounts and plaster jackets and all the other things that we know go into that. And so it kind of gets skipped over. And even when things are shown off effectively, the Tyrrell, as I've seen, you have your prep lab, or one of your prep labs fully on display. You have the prep table in the galleries. I've done things like this myself. And what happens is the public look at that and go, oh, that's neat, and walk on. Or they go, oh, that's neat, what are you working on? They very rarely say, what are you doing? Or why are you doing that? And I think they like to see, or they see that there's a process going on, and they obviously recognize that it's important, the bone is in the rock, we need to get the bone out, but again, they'll skip over it relatively quickly and they won't get the detail. And I think it is also a kind of challenging thing to present to them, because it is long and involved, and it is detailed, and there are lots of little steps that are involved in that, and that is unfortunately not likely to be immediately appealing to them. They are, I think somewhat understandably, going to be more interested in the mounted T-Rex than in 3 or 4 years of work of getting it out of the matrix. So that's the kind of gap we need to try and bridge. What we actually covered, you've probably noticed it already in the background, the skull here, is the preparation of a specimen of Gorgosaurus that Darren found in Dinosaur National Park in 2008. We thought this would be a really good thing to cover because the jacket, although unopened from what Darren had discovered and during the process of excavating it in the field, is it looked like it was likely to be relatively complete. And therefore the procedure is going to cover lots of different techniques and issues as we went through it. Since lots of other Gorgosaurus material was already known, we were unlikely to be revealing any great scientific secrets in doing so. We could consider that fairly safe in advance. And obviously we had a source for comparison. We could show other Gorgosaurus specimens and say, well, this is what we expect to find here. This is what we expect it to look like. And the matrix type, at least for Darren, was already pretty familiar. We knew it probably wasn't going to yield any particular problems. We knew the work was going to be relatively swift. And that's important when you're trying to engage with your audience. We wanted them to follow us for multiple posts over a number of weeks. That's not going to work if the thing is going to take 3 or 4 years to complete preparing, such as the gorgeous Ankylosaurus Mark is working on. Sorry, Ankylosaur, not Ankylosaurus. Bad boy. And that is an important issue when we're trying to keep this thing moving along and get our audience to follow us and be sustained. Now, a Gorgosaurus, just in case you don't know, is a pretty large tyrannosaurine theropod dinosaur, around 9 meters or so in total length at adult. This is going to have immediate appeal to the public because it is a huge carnivore. And you do have to play to the galleries a little bit to a certain degree. But actually, that has a benefit. For once, the inevitable comparison to Tyrannosaurus. Every single damn dinosaur is compared to Tyrannosaurus. Well, for once this is appropriate. It's a big Tyrannosaurine. It is close to T-Rex. That's going to help appeal. But it also means the public is going to be instantly familiar with what we're doing. They know this thing has a big head with sharp teeth, long back legs, little arms. That's a great start. You've got a hook and you've got a reference point that almost anyone from the age of 4 and up is going to understand. And that's a benefit for us. If you haven't seen it before, so this is a lovely skeletal reconstruction by Scott Hartman. This is actually a juvenile or subadult Gorgosaurus. This is actually about the size and proportions of the one we had in the jacket. So that's nice. Ooh, come on. There we go. So the procedure, what we set up to do is every few days, Darren would take a couple of photos of what he'd done to show the progress on the material and would write a short blog post describing the progress or a specific aspect of the preparation that was going on. He would then effectively send that to me. I would do all the formatting, sort it all out, add some tags and notes, and stick it online. Now, importantly, what we did is make sure everything is cross-referenced. So the post would begin with effectively a phrase along the lines of, last week we showed X, Y, Z. This is what we've done since. Next, we expect Y to happen, and link all of these things between each other with HTTP tags so that people can follow on between things forward and back relatively easily. And later on, I'll say why I think that's particularly important. Ooh. Aha. So this is the kind of thing that we did. So this is the original jacket up here, completely unopened, with the saw ready to cut the top layer off. This is it exposed, with just the first couple of elements starting to pick out. Unfortunately, we don't have any kind of real intermediate between these two. You can see a now relatively advanced piece of preparation. This is something I definitely recommend for anyone else doing this kind of thing. Massively over-record what you're doing, because you can always not use stuff. But of course, in hindsight, we go back and it's like, that's about 2 weeks' work, or even 3, and we just don't have any kind of transition. But you can see the skull appearing now very nicely, the ribs, forelimb, part of the hind limb starting to come out, and then the final near-finished version prior to cleanup. You can see we now have the pelvis fully exposed, most of the gastralia and hind limb are fully shown. The skull, fortunately, was particularly nice. So here we see the initial exposure with just a few teeth coming out of the premaxilla. Much greater exposure here with now almost all of the snout and mandible exposed, really getting towards the final thing, and then final cleanup and final preparation, and we see a beautiful skull has been revealed. Unsurprisingly, the posts on the skull and the revealing of the skull got an awful lot more hits and an awful lot more readers than the rest of it. So again, that playing to the galleries effect did show that we're drawing people in for certain highlights, and it's worth remembering that. So what did we cover? Well, obviously, as I've just shown, we showed the kind of unveiling of the specimen and the slow preparation process that released it, but also we were covering all of the different areas as far as we could of preparation practice. So we had individual posts which would cover a specific topic. So we had something just on opening the jacket and lifting it up into place and mounting it and making sure it was secure prior to work. Issues like health and safety and what goes on in the lab, all the different tools and how they're used for different kind of techniques. Little things here like stabilizing, so we have a glue bottle here, dripping liquid in to try and stabilize a break, and all of these different kind of things were shown. So it wasn't just a case of we drilled off another bit of rock, we drilled off another bit of rock. Well, I say we, Darren. And all of these different aspects to make sure that they were going through and being shown off properly, and everything provided a kind of integrated whole in context. Oh, come on. Oh dear. Uh-oh. Aha. Feedback. Obviously, one of the great things about writing online is you get pretty much, or at least you can potentially pretty much get instant feedback. People will see this, they will comment on it, they will tell other people about it, and the information will come back in. Now, somewhat frustratingly, and perhaps a little surprisingly, the comments were relatively sparse. We were getting lots of readers. Anything up to about 1,000 people would be logging on to read any individual post to see what we'd done, but you might get 1 or 2 comments in that time, and most of all they were things like, oh, that's interesting, which of course doesn't actually tell you very much. But we did see various bits of engagement. Occasionally we would throw up something and people would be very interested and want to know more about the pattern and process of what was going on. And in particular, what was nice and what we hadn't actually anticipated is that there were exchanges with other academics and preparators about techniques. And for example, that glue bottle I showed that Darren had rigged up, someone said, "Oh, that's a neat idea, I hadn't thought of that." So we were seeing the active exchange of methods and ideas between different preparators. And again, with the internet, it's particularly entertaining and particularly useful because whilst I hope this exchange between ourselves is very interesting and informative, with the net you have the opportunity to reach a truly global audience almost instantly, and that's fantastic. In the middle point, we did specifically include a Q&A session. So we set up one post that was deliberately designed to bring people in, any questions to date, look back over it, and try and get more people involved. That did have a small effect. It did increase the number of comments and the number of exchanges, but overall it wasn't enormous. In addition to posting material, we also tried to kind of push it further. The Tyrrell has its own Facebook page, and they covered it. Lots of other blogs linked to our material, and there were things going up on Twitter about it, which again draws the audience in. But it shows you just what an effect the media can have. In the last 6 months or so, I've started writing for the new UK newspaper, The Guardian, online. I put up a single post, one of the first things I did. Oh, by the way, any guys who's really interested in dinosaurs, you might want to go across to the main blog, Gorgosaurus Musings, he said very obviously, and showed the banner to try and get people to read it. And instantly, I had something like 5,000 or 6,000 people went across. So our readership just went through the roof overnight, simply because we got into a major outlet. Even if, of course, I did that myself rather than getting the media interested. It shows you what a difference it can make when you do hit the mainline press for these things. And I think it's fair to say fossil preparation in itself does not usually get into the mainstream media. So it does show that there's a genuine interest out there in the public, and once they were given the opportunity to go and read about that subject and learn about it, they took it with great gusto, and that was very interesting and useful. The feedback that we did get was overall very, very positive indeed. As I said, there weren't many comments, but they were mostly very positive. I had lots of private emails and conversations with people saying they enjoyed it thoroughly, they really had learned something, and some of the feedback, as you'll see in the next slide, was really rather novel, and included this little sketch that someone did of Gorgosaurus. I think we genuinely did provide a forum for exchange of ideas. We did see interchange between preparators and academics on preparation. We did see interchange between the public and preparators and academics with Darren and myself on the stuff that was going on, the processes and techniques. And we did provide an accessible description of the preparation process that is archived online. Hopefully this will stand, well, probably not for all time, but it's hopefully going to be around for years or even decades, and people can find and read that. And as I said, here is some of the more unusual feedback that we got. So Darren, a sketch of Darren out hunting in the field, and Darren preparing his Gorgosaurus, which is rather nice. We have actually published a paper on the process of blogging all of this, and this was included as a figure for that, which is rather nice. Oh, come on. What are the benefits of doing outreach online? There are some great ones. Outreach can be very fast and easy to do. Each of our posts only took 20 to 30 minutes, complete in terms of photographs, writing, formatting, sticking it up online. Darren could spot something, go, that's interesting, and within 30 minutes I had it on the website and people in Australia and Brazil are reading about it. That's phenomenal. You have instant publishing online, and you have instant feedback, and you can correct and revise things as necessary very quickly and easily. Even 5 years ago, but certainly 10 or 15 years ago, if you wanted to get an article on something, you had to go to Discover magazine or New Scientist and try and pitch it and try and get the editor interested and go through all the process of doing that. And even then, the people who would read it would only be the people who already bought that magazine. And of course, you only had word limits and printing costs and what the editor wanted. We don't have any of that. You can put up whatever you want. It can be as long as you want. You can take as long as you want. You can cover any subject you like. That's really fantastic. And in particular, you can go for tiny audiences, dispersed and niche audiences. No mainstream magazine is going to pick up something on how to prep a certain kind of fossil from a certain kind of locality, which may have been interest to only a few dozen preparators worldwide. Well, that doesn't matter when you're online. And in particular, people can search for it and find it themselves because of all the search engines and the way these things work. So you can reach people in a very, very different way. And that's particularly useful for what is, let's face it, effectively a relatively small niche part of paleontology that we occupy. So finally, here's my acknowledgements. MicroRiser, which is itself an online communication site where they try and fund academics to do research. So I've crowdsourced my funding to bring me here and work with Darren and present on this today. So my thanks to them. The Tyrrell Museum for, of course, allowing us to publicly document the preparation of one of their specimens, which is very useful and important. Scott Hartman for the use of his Gorgosaurus reconstruction, which is quite beautiful. And here is the admittedly rather horrible URL, though you should also see it printed in the abstract of your handbooks, so you know how to access the whole thing. Thank you very much for your time.